Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome back all the listeners around the globe to my show, The Great Muslim Inventions. You can call us on our studio on 01902 972 150. That's 01902 972 150. Or you can WhatsApp us on, you can call us on WhatsApp on 07440 420 432. And there are some exciting prizes to win. I repeat that WhatsApp number. It's 07440 420 432. So the listener, before we went on the break, we were discussing about how intelligent Mr. Zariab was, who was a fashion icon of his time and age, and who brought all this fashion and etiquettes from the Muslim world to the West. The next inventor or next invention, rather, we'll discuss is about vision and the cameras, the invention of the cameras. We all got, most of us, well, all of us got smartphones, and one of the main features in smartphones, people look at the how many megapixel the camera is, and that's one of the reason behind choosing a mobile phone to get good pictures and make their videos and upload them on the social media platforms. So, as a child, when my uncles or aunt or I myself as well used to play this peekaboo thing, and when you close your eyes, you think nobody's seeing you, like an ostrich. When the ostrich sees in danger, he just hides his head in the sand and he thinks he's safe. And you will be surprised that the initial time in the Dark Ages, there was a theory behind the Greek scholars. Uh, and they says we see only because a laser from our eyes, like a Superman, uh, comes out and strike the objects. So the part of the object which is struck scatters, and that object where it strikes, we can see. So that was a theory Greek scholars used to have till very long in this Dark Ages. But then the Aristotle and Galen, the famous scholars or philosophers, uh, they believe that there is something not emitting from the eyes, but something going back to the eyes. But what they don't know. So, in 19th century, a very very famous Muslim, again the mathematician, the philosopher, the chemist, the inventor, Mr. Al-Kandi. He was the first one to lay down the foundation of modern day optics. And he questioned the Greek theories of vision. He said that how we see is our visual cone is not because we emit rays from the eyes, but it is because the rays from the sunlight comes and hit an object and then reflected back on to the straight line, and that rays when enter into our eyes, that's how we see. So he was the first person to present this theory, and after working on his theory, he wrote two very good research papers or research books, you can say, which is still now in this 22nd century, 21st century, we are still using in was still used in research. So any research paper, any research starts about the optics or the vision. Most of the research starts from Al-Kindi research because that was the basis of the vision and the camera. So, like I said, he was the first one, who who told us that light travel in a straight line. Okay, so it can strike with or without the mirror, and depending upon the distance, we see an upright image, not the upside down of the image. So, based on his theory in the 13th century, another Muslim scientist, philosopher named Ibn Hatim, he was the first person on in the history who drew the image of an eye and the nerves, and he was the first one to tell us that eye is composed of three different layers and how the eye processes the image and sends the signals to the brain. His theory was also based on uh, Al-Kandi's experiment that light travels in a straight line. He was the greatest Muslim physicist and the student of optics of all time. You say wherever it's from England to Persia, he every researcher from West Asia, Africa, Australia, from all the continents around the world, they all follow his research, his description of light and the movement of eyes according to that image. So, what Al Hatim did in the 10th century, he mentioned in one of his famous books. You can still find this book online, and if you're doing a research, and if you want to do the research again, this is a very good books to follow. And imagine that was in 10th century. So what he said, so the light travels in all directions, which is the opposite of any body, okay? And that body, if it's illuminated, okay, that that light enters or travel through that opposite structure or a body. So, for example, I'm sitting in front of the computer. So the light emitting from the ceiling and from the computer monitor, okay, is reflecting back to my eyes, and that's how I'm able to see the monitor and the lighting and all these walls and doors and everything in this radio station. And that theory, he wrote it in the Book of Optics. There is one major difference before Al-Hatim and Al-Kindi. The Greek philosopher, they presented theories. Some of them they were followed later by the Muslim scientists, and they proven their theory correct. Is they followed their theory by the experiment. So Ibn al-Hatim was the first one who said that the theory need to be backed up by the experiment. Uh, so he wrote a book of optics, which is now translated in so many other languages, and they're available online and all the other big libraries. You can go and find that book. Al-Hatim, he was born in Iraq, and he moved to Egypt on the invitation of the ruler of that time. At that time, there was a problem that the river Nile was flooding at every year, causing a massive damage to the infrastructure and causing the deaths of the people. So the ruler of Egypt, he invited him to come because of his geniusness and his popularity. He asked them to help him do something with or to save his people from the flooding. Because he was, like I said, all the other inventors. When I'm researching, I see they are so multi-talented. So, and same with Ibn al-Hatim. He was not just a good musician. He was a brilliant mathematician. He was an astronomer. He was a physicist. He was a physician. He was a chemist. And one of his in the Book of Optics, he laid the foundation of the modern day optics. Nowadays is known as magnum opus. Well, the word comes from his Book of Optics. So the king invited him and asked him to build a dam. So that's what the idea he gave. So I'm going to build a dam across the river, and that dam will stop the flooding. Again, at that time, there's nothing mentioned in the history he failed, but nothing mentioned why he was failed. What I read in different research papers and in the book by Professor Al Hassani, their idea is maybe because of the material or the sand they were building a wall with are not suitable or not strong enough to hold the flooding. So he tried for so many years, but he failed. So, and the ruler of Egypt at that time, he was very, very, what you said, a tyrant. Okay, he wasn't happy. So initially he sentenced Ibn al-Hatim to death. But Ibn al-Hatim, he was clever, so he started acting as a crazy man. So the king and his advisors and the ministers, they said, okay, probably he's just a crazy person and he thought he will build it. So the king sentenced him 10 year imprisonment in his house. So he was house arrested for 10 years without allowed to be living outside the house. So one day he was sitting in his room, and there was a small hole in the window shutter, and he saw that the sunlight is coming from that hole and it making an image on the wall opposite to it, and the image was like the half moon shape. And that's where he he observed that if a light travel from a small hole reflecting from the object or from the sunlight, we can have an image on the opposite side. So what he said, or what he wrote in his book, I can quote, said he said that the image of the sun at the time of the eclipse, unless it is total, demonstrate that when the light passes through a narrow or a round hole and it is cast on a plane opposite to that hole, it takes on the form of a moon sickle. Later on, he developed what is called a, a dark room. In Arabic, he named that as Al Bayt al Muslin, which was translated into Latino as a camera obscura. And in Arabic, he called it as a camara. And still nowadays in Arabic, the camera is called as kamara. So the Greek, they changed that into camera obscura, which means the dark room. So he invented a photo booth at that time, basically what it is. So, and that's how the camera evolution started to come in the later stages after him. And if you look on the uh, old movies or old pictures, you will see a person coming with a camera, like a pinhole camera, and there used to be a cover or the curtains on the side or big sheet on the side, and the photographer goes inside that sheet and takes a photo, and they created a flash, and the flash was like a spark, and when it spark they take a picture, and that's it. That's how they go into the dark room and they develop the picture. So imagine Ibn Hatim and 10th century invented this camera, and because of his invention we all have now mobile phone cameras, we got security cameras, you're watching me live on the Facebook using the camera. And the camera, they are also used in the medical, in the endoscopy, in any sort of endoscopy, urology, where they insert cameras in your body and they look at the affected part of the body. So imagine if it wasn't Mr. Al Hatim, none of these things will be invented. So the one reason, like I was saying that in the last week as well, that every Muslim scientist or every Muslim invention, it happened. It because there were all these scientists. They were multi-talented. They were they went to the madaris. So they were mathematician, they were philosopher, they were musicians. That's Islamic music. I cannot this rope and bend, and they were a chemist. And but reading the Quran, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has opened their brains, so they were doing this amazing inventions. Next, we move on quickly because the time is running out. About again the fine dining of Ziryab. Uh, Ibn Abdul Abdul Hassan Ali Ibn Nafi. His original name was Ziryab Ibn. I repeat that. Abul Hassan Ali Ibn Nafi. That was the name of the Ziryab. But because his uh, skin uh, t- skin color was dark, he was called a Ziryab, which in Arabic means a blackbird. So that's what he's famous for, Ziryab. And like I said, you go in most of the Muslim country, you'll find a restaurant named after Ziryab, and we got one in Birmingham as well. Uh, the invention of the toothpaste was one of his major development. And what I was reading, and I came out the conclusion that when the Greeks they started inventing few things, the churches and the popes of that time, they either persecuted those scientists or those inventors because it was not mentioned in the Bible, and they think it was an evil thing. But none of these scientists, none of these inventors were ever killed by any of the Muslim rulers because of their inventions. So if they invented a deodorant or a toothpaste like Ziryab did, none of the Khalifa, none of the rulers, none of the Sultan, none of the kings, they killed any of those inventors. They in fact supported him. They asked them for the advice. Uh, Mr. Ziryab, like I said, he was a fashion icon at his time. So the most important thing, like I said, not just a three-course meal and the fine dining. He just brought the introduction of the toothpaste, the introduction of the deodorant, the introduction of the tableware. He was the first one to brought a leather furniture to Spain. Just imagine at that century, okay, 1200 years ago, 1200 years ago, when Spain was part of the Islamic world, he brought the leather furniture to the Spain. He made changes in the clothing as well. So he designed different styles of clothing. One of them is a very famous where he has produced a colored stripped fabric and a coats of transparent fabric, and which are still found in the Morocco today. That was one of his famous dressing codes. Uh, After gaining his achievement and goals, okay, there was a in all the other parts again from the Spain, the other parts of the country or the state, the Muslim Empire at that time, he became just so famous, okay, because and at that time he was a single man. Imagine, he hasn't got any social media, he hasn't got any newspaper, he hasn't got any of the advanced communication systems at that time, and he just becomes so famous by just the word of mouth, but just for the people, uh, where when the traders they come and they meet him or see his product when they go back to their country, it's just a word of mouth, and that brought um, many traders into the Spain, and that's how the Undulus or Cordoba economy grown that time, and that's what the leaders and the Sultan they were establishing institutes, they were establishing factories, they were establishing the skill, they were training the skilled workers who can work on these projects, and they were starting making a good income for the economy, and that money was spent on the people of the Spain. So he most of the modern day scientists and modern day researchers recently, they're very surprised because it's one person, a lone man, okay, single-handedly transform the culture, the design, the fashion on its own at that time. So that's why he's become a legendary figure in the Muslim era and in the western part of the Europe. He was the first one to introduce a different clothing for the summer and for the winter. He was the first one to introduce the shoes with the sole, and that shoes with the sole or sole shoes, they just become a massive hit. Okay, not just in the country, but in all part of the world. Just imagine, no, he was the first one to have soles into the shoes. So that was just like a big, massive hit in the Spain. And when the traders they were coming and they were seeing people wearing different shoes, so they started taking back, and then there was a big, big, massive shoe production in the Spain. In the Arabic, these shoes was called kurk, and the plural of kurk is akrak. Uh, so when it was taken to the Castellanian, they named that as Al Cork, and he was um, he was an artist basically. He was a fashion icon. He was an artist, and so the next time, whenever you go out for a shopping or see the latest fashions in the fanciest designer shop, remember the high heels of the 1,000 years ago, of 1,000 years ago. The more sophisticated styles and the methods were then adopted by the Christians after the conquest of Andalus. So imagine the whole of the Europe was in the dark ages, was in the dark, and at that time Spain, which was ruled by the Muslims, have the roads, have the street light system, have the sewerage system, and have the running water system, all invented and designed by the Muslims. The Muslims were famous in the fashion, and their fashion was copied by the non-Muslims in Europe and outside Europe. And now we are doing the opposite thing. We're following the West and leaving our Islamic designer, our Islamic clothing. There's no harm. I mean, there is no harm. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an order, has a restriction. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us a dress code for a woman and for male. So any clothing which is inappropriate according to the Sharia of Islam, try to avoid it for both men and females. So, guys, when you try on a light pair of a summer trousers or a dress, remember Ziryab, the blackbird from 1200 years ago, because this was the time such idea was flying into Europe from the east, and now it's the other way around. Uh, I thank all of my listeners who've been on the show and listening to my show. The next week we will be discussing about the school and the invention of the universities and how are the universities like in those countries. So Khuda Hafiz, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.